We all go a little mad sometimes, especially when Tommy forces me to just continually watch horror movies throughout the month of October. Psycho, coming up next. Haven't Seen It with Tim Sestito and Tommy Tevenet. Hello, everybody. Welcome on in. Thank you all so much for listening today. This is a podcast where one of us is watching a movie for the very first time. And today, that is myself. Tommy, you've seen Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho before, right?
This is my second time watching it, and honestly, of all the movies we've covered horror-wise, I'm shocked you've never seen this before because it seemed like it would have been right up your alley.
It's one of those
Hitchcock,
that's just like right up my alley, but I'm like, oh, is it creepy? And like I've seen the iconic kill before. It's like arguably the
yeah,
most iconic kill in the history of cinema. Uh,
yeah.
I would say probably is. It's just it's everywhere. I actually thought it was
I,
at the start at the top of the movie, but I like how it ended up building into it. So I just
yeah,
kept
that's
waiting.
cool.
I'm like, when's the kill?
Yeah, literally, you're just waiting for that fucking money shot right there. I mean, it's a kill that like has been parodied to death. I mean, like we've had like Looney Tunes cover like do a parody of it before, and like so many people just do the fake out and stuff like that. And these days, I mean, Brian De Palma for all his fucking work is a master of just using shower scenes like that of people getting killed in showers.
Yeah, it's been parodied to death. But it's in every commercial that has to do with movies, right? It's
Yeah.
like even if you haven't seen Psycho, you've seen like that murder, you've heard that scream before.
Mhm.
It's like rooted in American culture.
Mhm.
Um, Alfred Hitchcock Psycho, and we're gonna dive deeper into the film for all it's worth here, but Tommy and I were going to have a special discussion about a film that just came out last Friday, Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, Tommy, for me, it feels like a movie that's more up my alley. You know what I mean in terms of like that. If you call you, I can get labeled as pretentious sometimes when it comes to film. And
Yeah,
you're like
a
on
little bit.
Shutter watching bad B movies, bad B horror movies. So you know,
Essentially.
but I would love to know what your expectations for it were going into it.
I never really gotten the vibe from Martin Scorsese that he's a pretentious filmmaker, and there's been all this talk on Twitter about like how like oh like he's such a snob or whatever, mostly from fucking MCU fanboys that just like
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
can't handle criticism. And like as someone that loves Marvel too, it's just like oh god, it's so fucking cringe when someone just says like some take that like oh Miss Marvel's more relatable than anything that Martin Scorsese's made in his life. And it's just shut up, you're being a fucking idiot. But anyways,
Yeah,
this
and
movie I thought
let me just say I didn't mean it in
okay.
that way. I meant it in a sense that like if you just read like the synopsis of this movie of like following the years of the Osage tribe, like and the murders that happened, and then you see a 3 hour 26 runtime.
Yeah.
I'm just saying like pretty much any other director puts that out, it's probably like a no.
Yeah. But the fact is, Martin Scorsese is like, I
Scorsese
gotta fucking see it. Yeah,
juices
exactly.
it up. Yeah.
And I'll admit, there's a part of me that I went to go see it Sunday night, and part of me was almost just like, I know this is gonna be a good movie. I'm excited for it, but like, do I want to dedicate my whole Sunday night to this movie? Because
Yeah.
that's what it ended up being. I saw a 5 o'clock screening. I didn't get out until like I think almost 9 because when you factor in trailers or anything like that. But granted, given that, I didn't really feel the runtime for the majority of this movie.
Yeah,
I mean, I felt
I didn't either. Maybe towards the end, and maybe towards like during her sickness, so you're like, okay, we could have maybe sliced and
speed.
diced it up to maybe speed it up. But I feel like Scorsese with his history, he can do whatever the hell he wants, and good for him. He's
Yeah.
gotten $200 million budget for these long epics that like historical epics, like at the tail end of his career. So for you, what was your kind of main takeaway after sitting through the
I I just think that in general, like the performances were great. I mean, we haven't seen Robert De Niro this good since, I mean, granted, The Irishman, but even then, he's better than he was in The
I
Irishman
thought he
because,
was. I thought it was one of his best performances. He was
yeah,
unbelievable in that
and
in Killers.
I thought that this was just a great engaging movie that really kept you involved. And like, there's some complaints that I saw that people are like, oh, there's no mystery, but that's not the point. It's about
Yeah.
how did we allow this fucked up shit to happen, and like this is how fucked up things were. And the parallels between Tulsa, how they kept on mentioning that throughout the movie, the
Mhm.
historical significance, I thought was just great. I thought that Leo was obviously really fun. One thing that was great in my screening was that in the scene, slight spoiler, where Robert De Niro's getting, I'm not going to say what it is, but he's getting Leo to sign some papers. There's some on my
Yeah.
screen that's kept on screaming out, Leo, no, don't sign that, what are you doing, what are you
Somebody
doing, come
actually
on, Leo.
screamed at it.
Yeah, screamed out, yelled out in the audience, be like, "Come on, Leo, don't say that." I thought it was fucking hilarious. It kind of sometimes I like shit like that, cheeky shit audience members doing in movies. I'm okay
I
with
do
that.
like that. That's like a visceral reaction.
Yeah,
And I almost think for that audience member, like he kind of, because the movie is told from Leo's perspective. Now I've seen from Osage community members, like there was a consultant on the film who on the red carpet saying after he saw the screening, he said he wanted it to just be from the Osage perspective and not from these killers perspective. I kind of look at it as, I think if Scorsese could actually get funding for a movie from the Osage perspective, he probably would have liked to have done it from that side of things.
yeah.
But you're getting Apple to give them $200 million to make a 3 hour and 26 movie and a 4 hour cut that's going to be on Apple TV. You're going to have, you need a guy like Martin Scorsese as the director, and then you're going to need Leo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro to get some kind of money back from this and put a prestige to the film that,
Yeah.
like, leading, like, the Osage actors were fantastic in them, and they're all relatively unknown uh actors and performers. I mean, Lily Gladstone, like, she's the emotional core of the movie, and just like the torture she goes through in,
Yeah.
the white man's conquest of getting their money is
Mhm.
just, it's visceral and it's haunting. And right, like the you said, the
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I can't oh, I say that I can't speak personally to like the perspective of the Osage, but
yeah, of
I did think
course.
that at least I did think that at least that they were able to spice in a good amount of perspective, at least from Lily Gladstone's character. Some characters were kind of just like really just kind of brushed aside. She was really the only prominent Native American voice in the movie,
Yeah,
like throughout. But I think that with what they did also just like show sometimes you have to sit in with the terrible characters and just see like
to
how do
to
we
get
allow this to happen. And like there's some black humor moments in this movie, but a lot of them were basically just like, yeah, so I can go kill this Indian. Where's my money? Come on, like give me it or something like that. Like
yeah, like one of the cuts that I loved, it was early on, and it was like kind of where you don't know what Leo's character is. Like, he just comes into town after World War I. His uncle gets him a job driving a taxi. He's driving like Gladstone, and then it cuts to him and a group robbing the Osage, and then it's him gambling all this money, like all these jewels, right? And just screaming like, "I love money, I love it," right? And losing all the jewels in a bet. And then it's a hard cut to Lily Gladstone, her character Molly doing like a morning ritual to the sun. And it's like, one group of people are called savages and one group of people are not called savages. And guess which ones are acting savagely? And it's obviously
yeah.
the white man. And it's a study of Leo's character, who's, Leo does such a good job of playing just like a dipshit. Like, he's very good at it.
This might be the dumbest character Leo's ever
Oh,
played.
yeah, I think it's easily the dumbest character Leo's ever played, and I don't
Yeah.
think it, like, his lack of intelligence takes away from his like cruelty, because that doesn't take a layer of intelligence. I do think it's like, once the ball gets started, in terms of like, okay, you're gonna start, you were gonna go date Molly, you'll get into that money, right? And then it's just like, well, we're gonna take care of her sister, her one sister, Anna. Like, we want her to go. Who's
Yeah.
like, that's like the first major focus death of the Osage that we get to see. And then her other sister and her husband, they literally blow up the house.
Yeah.
Um,
Spoilers.
and spoilers. And then De Niro's character, King Hill, he comes walking back. He was at a rally in Fresno, Texas, to make sure he's not there. Right? He can't possibly be connected. He wasn't in town. And the cop just goes to him and goes, "You're being too loud." Like, I love that little moment because it was like the cops didn't like know who organized it and didn't care.
Yeah.
They were just like,
It was the point when once you have what's his name, fucking Jesse well, not
Jesse Plemons,
Jesse Plemons.
He plays the main
Yeah,
detective from the start of
base
FBI.
Once you get to the point where he enters the picture, it's a thing that, like, this is not a mystery whatsoever. It was so glaringly obvious to the FBI who was doing this that they're able to quickly solve the case to the point. And like, that's the whole point of the movie. It's just that this whole community just didn't give a shit, and they're just
Everybody knew who was behind it, and there was nothing to stop it. And it was frightening how Hill kind of led himself as a champion of these people and a part of this community and wanting to help these people, but in broad daylight he had no problem just destroying the community. What did you think of the ending? We're going to do a little
spoiler alert.
Let's in the broad stroke of things, it was from the perspective of it was telling the story again and kind of giving an epilogue, but it was from the perspective of like a 1940s radio show. And then Scorsese himself comes out and reads like the epilogue of all these of Molly, right? Like, he's the one who gives that brand string. Like,
I think it's a cool framing device. I think it's a little bit better than like having just like a title card show up at the end of like just like freeze frame on Lily Gladstone. She died in 1936. I did think that. I mean, I'm trying to think before one of his movies before, like acting. At least is the most prominent I can think of off the top of my head.
Taxi Driver is probably the most prominent that I can think of.
To be fair, I haven't seen that in like 15 years, but anyways, yeah, I think that like in general, I think the way he just said in the end that just like the murders were never mentioned in her obituary was kind of haunting, and it's a way that's crazy when you think about this. This isn't that far away from history. I mean, Ernest Burkhart, the character that Leo played, died in '86, so like not that long ago. This isn't like
and it's almost forgotten history. And I think part of it was just showing like because like the build up into Marty giving it and like the radio program, it's like it's sensationalizing it, and it's almost Scorsese coming out and saying, "I'm also sensationalizing it," because like it was a pure fourth wall break from the director himself, like and it was almost a reminder of being like that. Like, ultimately, that's what this ends up having to be for it to get released, to get made. But like, don't like I showed this happening in a brutal sense so that you understand the brutality and you can't escape it. It's one of those movies that when it comes out on Apple TV, I want to re-dive into it because I think I'll pick up more of what's there, because it's a lot of moving parts, and in a typical Scorsese fashion, it's don't worry about plot so much. It's a lot more about character and story. That's just like a trademark of how he makes his films. And I think on a rewatch, there's just gonna be more to pick up and like comprehend, because I think it's all there together. But the pacing was terrific, the acting was terrific. I think Lily Gladstone deserves an Oscar. Should easily be the front runner.
Would you consider it in best actress or best supporting actress? I'm leaning towards best actress.
I'm leaning towards best actress too. She's crucial, because if you don't have her there and you just follow these two men be cruel to these people, like it's just disgusting. Like, apparently, and you need that emotional connection and release next to it.
Scorsese was saying in interviews leading up to this movie that originally it was gonna have the film take place of like the perspective of Jesse Plemons' character, the FBI agent.
That's how the book.
And that's how the book was. And but he when he was writing this and he was looking at it, he's like, oh my God, like this would just be sensationalized and just like completely like lost perspective. But instead, you need to focus on the fucked up people that are doing this, just to show like
it could be your husband killing your killing your sisters just to accumulate more money. Like,
Yeah.
that's
So
simple.
overall, 4.5 out of 5 for me. I mean,
I'm
I think it was really good. I wasn't the best Scorsese movie ever, but that's a high bar to fill.
That's a high. I would also say 4.5 out of 5. I think it's one of those movies that's maybe the most important in his filmography, like just in terms of like cultural preservation and story preservation. Like aside, I think it might be that, whether it's his
Well, yeah,
like
because we need movies like this more and more. I mean, we're getting to a point in culture where, like, the Tulsa Massacre, a lot of people only found out about that because of the Watchmen TV show that came out 4 years ago, which is kind of
yeah.
sad that that's how we learned through American history. But if we don't have these media outlets, and like, some shit's just gonna be brushed aside, swept under the rug. Like, we'll forget that awful history that happened. We need to put a lens to ourselves and say, like, this is how fucking shitty we can be as humans.
Yeah, and I think I 4.5 out of 5, and maybe one of those it could become a 5.5 out of 5 if on a rewatch. I just think it's such a dense film. Like there's just so much going on that I could appreciate like it more on a second viewing where I know where it's going and looking for little details. Also, funniest moment of the movie was when De Niro spanks Leo with a paddle for messing up one of the kills.
Yeah.
And apparently Leo wore padding in his pants.
Yeah, amazing.
Fun little tidbit there from
Fun fact.
Killers of the Flower Moon. I highly recommend it in a theatrical setting. It's just, you're getting one of the greatest, probably the greatest living filmmaker, and one of his swan songs. And really happy I decided to commit the time to go see it because it's definitely worth it.
Same.
So in that somber, and obviously, keep in mind the history and the significance of the brutality towards the Osage people as well. I guess in that note, on a somber note, I guess now is a good time to transition into Psycho. And that was actually a trailer from 1960 where it just says Psycho on it. It was a small TV spot or short little teaser trailer that they had for it.
I'm glad you didn't find the clip that apparently there was a 6-minute trailer that they made for this back in the
I
day.
believe it.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could have found it, but I'm not playing a 6-minute trailer. We got places
Yeah,
to
of
go.
course.
People to see, Tommy. We can't be going
Exactly.
through watching 6-minute trailers, especially after watching a 3-hour and 26-minute movie this week.
Yeah.
So Tommy, you as the horror buff, I'm surprised this is only your second time watching Psycho, because it's probably
the
considered
first
like
time,
an iconic. It's like one of the most iconic films ever made.
the first time I ever saw it was around like this time 10 years ago. I think I brought up on the pod before when me and our buddy Will from the pod did a 3-day horror movie marathon, and that was a part of
I
it.
remember that horror movie marathon. You being like,
Yeah.
"You want to come over?" And I'm like, "No."
No. We watched everything from Psycho to Scream, Scream 2, Zodiac was involved. We watched Jaws, a little bit of fucking everything. So, I mean, like, in the context of the 3-day horror movie marathon, when you watch, I think we probably watched 30, 40 movies. This is like our Christmas break, freshman year of college or sophomore year. And when you're in the context of that, a lot of the movies start to blur in together and you kind of forget some things. So it was good to revisit this movie in a way that was not in a fatigued, like, hue of just like fucking violence constantly on my fucking eye. It was almost like the fucking Clockwork Orange thing. I'm just like, my eyes peel open and watching everything.
I'm just thinking of like people that time of year, they're binging holiday movies, maybe Hallmark Christmas movies, right? Just something adorable that's cute for the family. Like it's just schlocky nonsense. But you're just like, nope, it's the most wonderful time of the year to watch people get brutally murdered and watch psychotic killers.
If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure the marathon ended on Christmas Eve. So That's how we spent our Christmas Eve. So clearly my priorities are straight for the holidays. So, but anyways, it was great to revisit this movie. I mean, this is my first Hitchcock movie I ever saw back then when I did it, and it's kind of crazy to the fact that on the pod this year we've covered, this is our fourth Hitchcock movie, I believe.
Fourth Hitchcock, yeah.
So we've covered Vertigo, we've covered Rear Window, we covered The Birds, and now this. And I think it's kind of crazy, but I think the black and white kind of helped this movie age a lot better than the other three movies that we watched.
Well, I don't think any of them. Maybe The Birds aged the worst just because of like the effects of The Birds. It's the only one that practically needs it the most. I know you weren't the most in love with Rear Window, but I don't think black and white versus color would have made a significant difference in that film, to be honest.
I think it's also just like the color timing, because when you get into the color timing part of it, it kind of just like puts it in an era right there.
And I know with some of the restorations of Hitchcock films, especially the color ones, there's debates over what was the actual color palette versus the restoration color palette, but that's all a bunch of nerdy nonsense that nobody cares about.
So this movie was filmed in black and white for budget cost restrictions, essentially. So Hitchcock wanted to film this movie, and Paramount balked at his proposal and refused to provide his usual budget. So he's like, all right, well, we'll film it quickly, we'll film it cheaply in black and white, and we'll use my Alfred Hitchcock Presents television crew to film this movie. So just trying to find a way of like cheaping, he didn't even take his usual rate. He ended up taking like a cut of the box office, which made him a fortune when this became a sleeper hit. But I mean, I think just the cinematography of this movie just really holds up, and the performances don't really feel hokey at all in a way that like some older movies can. I think
especially like older horror movies.
Oh yeah, exactly.
They feel very Victorian Broadway, like 1900s Broadway kind of style, like a Bela Lugosi Dracula. It's over the top. It's grandiose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've talked to you before about like I watched Frankenstein for the first time, I think like 2 years ago, and watching that for the first time, I was just like, I appreciate the significant cultural significance of this, but it just is way too hokey for me. In terms of and it's kind of funny when you go to some movies when and that movie opens up with like the guy saying like you're about to see a horrible and terrifying picture, and you're like, this is not horrifying at all, but like back in the 30s it was. But Psycho in some ways still kind of hits in that way. It still kind of feels suspenseful. I wouldn't say super scary, but especially when the shower scene has been like fucking, like we said on the top of this episode, parodied to death.
There's the part of me that goes like, I've seen the shower scene so many times just on its own verse and like the parody of it. It's hard to watch this movie from a modern lens and go in completely blind, which I love to do, but it's hard, like, that's coming at some point in the movie. I would say in terms of let's just go into the resolution of it, and we'll kind of work our way back from it, just because that's where we are in our conversation. The twist of like, when I see the mother come in and stab her, I'm like, okay, well, it's like I knew it was going to be Perkins in the wig, right? You knew it was going to be Norman Bates in the wig.
Did you know that going in, or is that like you just deducted?
I just kind of deducted it a little bit. I was just like, that was like, well, it's either the mother, which just feels too straightforward for it, like a Hitchcock movie, right? Like he has the old line, like, tension in a film is putting a bomb under the table, letting the audience know, but not letting the characters know what's going on. It was either the mother or it was him in a wig. And then as Sam and the sister Lila start to explore it more in the town, they have Arbogast, the PI, investigating them and going there, and they go to the old deputy sheriff played by John McIntyre. He was great as just like a curmudgeon old cop. I love that kind of role in there. Just a sleepy town curmudgeon cop being like, the mother's been dead for 10 years. And then I was like, okay, it's him in a wig. And then that there were other missing girls there during the resolution with the psychologist, right? That he was the one who actually committed the double murder of the man because the mother wasn't giving him the attention. when I think about it from the perspective of I think it doesn't de-age the movie, but I think about the year this came out. Like serial killers are like kind of roughly become more like the FBI starts actually investigating these people in like the 1970s. Like this was
Like
very
this movie in the book, it was based on the book Psycho was based on the Wisconsin grave robber Ed Gein, who also inspired Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all these other stuff. But even he was like only like 2 people he killed, and I think the rest was he just made like human skin furniture or something like that.
yeah.
But like, you know, that wasn't really a prevalent thing. I mean, this movie at the time was controversial to say the least. I mean, like Walt Disney wouldn't let Alfred Hitchcock film it. Like, you know, was it Disney World, I believe it was.
Disneyland at that point, right?
It was Disneyland. He refused to let Hitchcock film at Disneyland because Hitchcock made that disgusting movie Psycho. And you know, this is a time where the Hays Code was still going on. The Hays Code only ended in '68. So like, you know, as controversial as like, you know, the blood was in the shower scene, it was also really controversial the fact that they showed a toilet flushing. That's the time we were at back then. It's insane to think about that was something controversial.
Yeah. And I think like Karina Longworth, she does the You Must Remember This podcast. She has
Mm.
my favorite of hers is the Manson murders.
Yeah.
It's called Charles Manson Hollywood, and the first episode of that is just setting up what Hollywood was at the time leading into it, and like what led to somebody like Charles Manson coming off as cool, and like that cultural shift, and like that Hays Code of 1960. It brings that shit down. I highly recommend that podcast, that series. I know she just did the erotic 80s and 90s series,
Yeah,
which
a
is
great series too.
it's a great series, great podcast. Go check it out if you're interested in learning more about
Yeah.
the history of film.
Well,
But
sometimes I feel like the Hays Code is like a reason why sometimes the older movies don't connect with me as much because it just feels so hokey, so like,
mhm.
oh, like do gooder thing. And like, you know, there's stuff with the Hays Code back in the day where it's like the villain at the end of the movie has to find a way to like you lose or something. It's almost like, you know, how like with Fight Club recently, it was like screened in China and they changed the Chinese censors changed the ending. So the ending of Fight Club was just a title card that says the authorities figured out the whole entire plan and arrested everyone. There was no damage done whatsoever.
The great People's Party of the communist reign in China would definitely figure it out. They are great overlords. Please don't overthrow us as we send you back to your cells that you live in. Wonderful system of government they have there.
But yeah, I mean that if we still had that today in like the American films, it would just like would make films so toothless. And like it is shocking that we were able to get a movie like this even made like back then within the confines.
Those censors exist. It's just for corporate benefit, right? Apple has a thing, like it was a thing in the 2000s that the bad guy wouldn't have in like the late 2000s, 2010s. If you watch any action movie there or mystery movie, the bad guy, he's not using an iPhone because Apple had a clause. I think it's gone now, but if the bad guy could not use an iPhone because they did not want their product associated with that. So it's a little more corporate censors. It's not in terms of general broad concepts, right? Like the Hays Code.
Yeah.
But we still have that kind of censorship of context. And then if you have that knowledge going into a movie and then you're watching it and you're like, well, that guy is not using an iPhone and everybody else is, it's like a distinction in a character that makes you realize that. And we don't have, with Psycho, it does feel a little bit of a break of the Hays Code. It just doesn't have that kind of, I think about even just the beginning. It's like I didn't know anything else. I just knew the shower scene. I knew Norman Bates Motel. That's all I know.
Well, it kind of reminds me. Earlier last week, I watched The Sixth Sense for the first time. A movie that, like, also has a famous scene, a famous twist of Bruce Willis is dead at the whole time, and I've heard that for years and years and years. And I just figured this is a movie not worth really checking out. I know the twist. What's the fucking point? And I watched Sixth Sense for the first time, and I fucking loved it. I thought it was an amazing movie, and it worked despite the twist. So do you think with Psycho, do you think like the shower scene still worked overall for you? I mean,
it comes at the perfect, like, even I think there's almost an anticipation, at least for me watching it. It was like, where does this all come into play? Where does this kind of come in? And it comes after this great conversation scene between Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh, just like they're like it's such an uncomfortable conversation about his mother and about being like, well, why don't you institutionalize her? I heard her yelling at you, and like I didn't know what the twist was. I only kind of saw it because it was like it's a high resolution, and just the way it's shot, it's like it's clearly a man in a wig stabbing her, like it's just it's not his mother. Was just kind of my giveaway. I don't know what it would look like on a film projector in 1960, or just like more audience bliss to that kind of thing, right? Like wouldn't be as big of a deal. But it was such a tense scene where you just feel so uneasy, and he has that great line, well, we all go a little mad sometimes, right? And you just
it's been referenced in everything.
It's been referenced 100,000 times, and then you have the image, of him stuffing the birds, and like, oh, it's more than a hobby. It's just it's like an obsession for me, and like you can just feel like she's uncomfortable, and that like there's something wrong with this guy. Like he's a bit
that scene makes your skin crawl. It's just like very reminiscent of like the cringe stuff we see in like movies today, where like we've all been in that situation where we get stuck in a conversation with someone that you just don't want to be fucking in that conversation, but you just want to be polite because they're making you feel fucking unsettling, and that's what it feels like. Part of me was thinking like if they ever did a remake of Psycho again, like you can almost see like a Michael Cera type or something like that.
Well, they've done it.
They've done it, which I think is just insane to think that Gus Van Sant had a blank check to do whatever the fuck he wanted, and he was like, "Let me do a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho." I'd love to
that is Psycho.
Yeah. There you go.
Was terrible. I like that it says here. This was in the Wikipedia page. After Hitchcock's death in 1980, Universal Pictures produced follow-ups, 3 sequels, a remake, a made-for-television spin-off, and a television series. It's like, oh, they had to wait until that man was dead, because the studios did not want this to get made. Hitchcock leveraged a lot of his own money and capital to get this movie done, and on a budget of $806,000, which good amount of money back in the 1960s, couple million, made 50 million at the box office.
Yeah, and like I said, like Hitchcock got a percentage of that, so he made fucking bank. But by the time we get to the sequels, the first sequel, Psycho 2, which I heard is good, was like 83. By the time we had slashers and stuff like that, I mean, like Halloween, which we covered last year, was obviously very much inspired by this movie, to the point that Jamie Lee Curtis is Janet Leigh's mom, all the way around, Janet Leigh's daughter. And you can just see like the influence on all these movies over and over again. So like, while obviously sometimes when the movie's like the first originator, it can feel a little bit tame, but overall I didn't think this was not that tame. I love the private investigator, his whole entire like little segue into the movie. I thought that Milton was great, but the whole shower scene, like just to get back to it, it's just insane to think about at the time, like how much of a twist that was. I mean, like we've seen this happen in movies again, where it happens like when Alien 3, there's a character that died. David Fincher was saying, this is going to be my Psycho moment, because it was a character he thought was going to be a main character throughout the movie and died halfway through. It's like, wait, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It's a jarring thing. This is a time in the movies where movie theaters at the time used to play shows on rotation all day long, and people would just frequently come in the middle and stay in the middle until the next showing.
Yeah, because it was a quarter to get in.
Yeah, so and like Hitchcock made movie theaters sign a contract that they would not let anyone in until the start of the film. So once they're late, they would not be let until the next showing. And then this started the process of what we do today, of like pretty much if you're like 30 minutes late to a movie, like
you're not
right. Well,
and it's like you don't want to go either. And that's actually a very big cultural shift in terms of movies, because at that time too, it was also like, single screens, like these big cinemas with 40 screens in them, right? Like that wasn't a thing. Like a multiplex was like 2 screens in one theater, but they're usually like big theaters, and they would show one movie at a time. Saturdays, I mean, this is going way back to like the 20s. By this point people had television, but for like newsreels, cartoons, right, that's how they were displayed and shown there. So like just in terms of what the theater was and meant to people, like it was, you just, when you go and you got there.
Yeah,
like
you just slide in.
a part of the culture. Now that shifted, and it coincides with the rise of television as well.
I'll throw this up on our Instagram later in our social media, but they had cardboard cutouts of Hitchcock pointing to his wristwatch, saying the manager of this theater has been instructed at the risk of his life to not admit any people into the theater after the picture starts, and pretty much just to say you didn't want to fucking destroy the twist, and this is the original spoiler warning thing where he'd be pretty much telling people he didn't have Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins go do the typical talk shows or whatever, because he was worried they'd give away more of the plot, and he wanted this to be a real surprise that Janet Leigh was going to be killed off. I mean, it's like the scream moment of having Drew Barrymore die in the beginning.
It shows. I mean, it's 50 minutes of it's just the first 50 minutes fully her perspective.
Yeah.
The first 50 minutes follows it, and at that time that does feel like a very big twist. I think it still works in this movie perfectly. And it's the only element. It's more of a psychological horror than anything else. I think almost the scariest thing is she steals $40,000 from her boss just to run away, right? After the conversation with Norman Bates, she's going to run away with her boyfriend who lived in California. That's why she stays at the Bates Motel. And she's like, after that perspective of going mad, she's like, I did go mad. I can bring this back. I can figure something out here, even though I lose my job, whatever. The money, I'll give the money back. Norman's cleaning the hotel room, and it's that weird split of his personality between the mother persona and him, where he, and I think the hidden twist of it is you see the mother do the kill, and then you see Anthony Perkins walk in as Norman Bates, and just completely freaked out, visceral, but knowing he needs to do what he needs to do to protect his mother and clean up the room.
Yeah.
Now she had.
I clocked it. Pretty much it happens at the 50-minute mark. The shower scene, she's dead, and then they spend at least 10 minutes, I believe.
Yeah.
Just him cleaning up everything, and just immediately, I can only imagine. I mean, I remember my mom telling me at the time that people were fucking just flabbergasted when that happened, and wait, what? And it would have been have any context for that, and anything the hero of our movie just fucking straight up died.
I would love to show Walt Disney an Eli Roth film and get his reaction to that.
Exactly, it's like we were talking about with The Thing, where it's just people at the time then were like, "Oh my god, this is fucking disgusting," and the critical reviews for Psycho were a little mixed, just kind of like what The Thing was. Where there's one critic where she ended up British critic C.A. Lewis was so offended that she not only walked out before the end, but she permanently resigned her post as a film critic for The Observer.
Good. That's sounds good. Sounds like she needed to.
Yeah.
I think and I don't know the history of horror films, but the monster was usually a monster. It was a werewolf. It was a creature from the Black Lagoon. It was Dracula. It was Frankenstein's monster, right? And I'm just spinning off the iconic things from my head. But in terms of horror, it was all these pulpy comics, right? And then in the film representation, it was based off these creatures from these fairy tale books. These novels,
your creature of the creature of the Black Lagoon. We had the 1950s era leading up to us, which was a lot of 50s B movies, it was never and shit.
It was never a guy. It was never just the guy working the counter at the hotel. It was never that guy, and that's a big shift from an audience. And I'm really glad we're having that perspective conversation, because I think and just to tie it back into Killers of Flower Moon, there's these two kids that are going viral. My hat's off to them, because their grift is just complaining about anything that's not a comic book movie.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
These two nerdy kids. I saw the ultimate blast on them. It was nerd. Being a nerd used to mean you were smart, but you were smart, but then you weren't good looking or strong. But the benefit was you were smart, and that would benefit you later in life. Now, if nerds aren't smart, what benefit do they have? And I was like, that's a burn that's hard to recover from. But I think these kids' grift is they're Gen Zers. They don't want to work a real job. They don't have any real insight into filmmaking. So if they just make a hot take film podcast that people will hate watch to clip and put up, it's going to get the numbers that they need regardless to maybe get some sponsorship. So like my hat's off to them because like I saw
maybe that's what we need to do.
I saw right through their grift. No, I'd rather stick to my guns, Tommy, than try to make some. Wow, Killers of the Flower Moon was so long. Like films just shouldn't even be that long unless it's Endgame. Like I would lose my soul every day. I said that. But
yeah,
my hat's off to them for that grift. You know, and just kind of like tying it back into that, like, and you're saying like the critics were mixed on this. It would be taking something that, when you think of it just from the context of a film, it's like it's masterfully done. It's Hitchcock, right? But you have this issue of it just not being what people are used to seeing anymore. And if you want to contextualize it to today, to Killers of the Flower Moon, people aren't fed 3-hour epic historical films that are like visceral and heart-wrenching. That's like squeeze that emotion out of you, that makes you leave the film like emotionally exhausted. Like modern audiences are not used to that anymore. And audiences in 1960 were not used to the man.
And it's the whole thing also
being
attention
the killer.
span.
Yeah, whatever. We don't need to go into that. But
yeah,
I think this.
But no, in terms of like perspective, when you think of the time of this, like obviously the shower scene we've talked about multiple times, but like even the death of the private investigator, of like how shocking that must have been. I mean, like the score of this movie is amazing by Bernard Herrmann, and I think it really helped save the movie, which is a point I'll get back to later. But when you have the private investigator dying, he gets stabbed, and then he immediately falls down the stairs, and then Anthony Perkins obviously stabs him over and over and over again. Well, granted, they don't show it like a slasher movie of like all the blood squirting out. At the time, just that seeing that over and over again was scary enough, and being like, oh my god, like what is being shown on the screen right now?
Well, let's take, before we go into best performance and stuff, let's take two groundbreaking films at the time that maybe aren't perceived as scary anymore. You have Psycho in 1960 and you have The Exorcist in 1973. I think The Exorcist works in terms of like a horror movie. I think that one works a lot better. Psycho to me kind of plays more as like a psychological thriller with a mystery intrigued into it, right? Like something's going on at the Bates Motel, we got to figure it out. And they're both masterfully done. I think the difference with The Exorcist is that it's so by the numbers routine of like, if your child had an was possessed by a demon and you've done everything you possibly can to solve it, and then it builds into that moment, that's like the frightening part of it. It just feels so grounded and mandated into what would actually happen if this was to happen today. Versus Psycho, where I don't think it's scary in the slightest because it's so tame compared to what audiences today have seen, but that doesn't take away from the impact of the movie as a thriller.
I think that overall Psycho, I mean, the scariest part of this movie is the score.
I agree.
Bernard Herrmann just created an iconic score, and I was thinking like today when I was listening to watching the movie, I was like, I'm sure this has popped up in other movies over and over again, not just for like parodies of the shower scene. And it's just like Hitchcock himself like thought this movie at first was like really trashy, and he was like, maybe this is just gonna be like some like low budget movie that's gonna be played in drive-ins. And then he heard the Bernard Herrmann score, and he's like, this is gonna be fucking great. I made a great movie right here. But on your point, I mean, The Exorcist, I saw it in theaters earlier this month, and that movie for me is still fucking haunting, still really plays really great. To a point that the new Exorcist movie, which I'll be covering on the Film versus Film podcast, just did not feel scary.
Martin.
Which I saw that over the weekend too, and that just is toothless. Whole other thing I can get into.
This podcast is already long enough. We can cover it on our next week's episode.
But basically, Psycho in general. I mean, like, I think that it's more so just that kind of performances in this movie that really carry it, and the score that carries it. I think that it's just I think the best acting I've seen in terms of like the Hitchcock movies personally. I think that it doesn't really suffer from like the old timey sound. I guess the sound design just worked a lot better. And like I said earlier at the top of the pod, the black and whiteness of this just kind of makes it feel a little bit timeless.
I think it adds tension to it.
That too.
Like the shadows just being more illicit and more in your mind, just I think enhances it versus this in color.
I am a star. I'm a star, I'm a star, I'm a star. I am a big, bright, shining star.
Right, Tommy, who is the star of the movie? Because this is just this is a lot of fantastic performances. I mean, I think it's, I mean, how is it not Anthony Perkins?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it would probably end up being him, but I mean, like this is a movie that just like you said, filled with amazing performances. My personal favorite performance, I think, was just Martin Blum as the private investigator Milton, and just pretty much keeps on getting underneath Anthony Perkins' skin and keeps on asking the questions over and over again. Anthony's just like all right, whatever, dude, like whatever. And even like John Gavin as Sam Loomis, the lover, he was really great, especially in the end movie scene where he's just like, oh, what are you doing with the money?
And Janet Leigh, because she has to get you emotionally invested into her and her decision to steal the money, which is that's very difficult to do, to make your protagonist do something that bad, especially at that time.
Yeah. Well, she stole 40,000, which is the equivalent of 400K today. So a lot of fucking money she stole right there.
Even if you just equivalent it to 40 grand today, that's a lot of money.
Still a lot of money.
That was in my mind though when I saw that. Like I was like, that is worth so much more money than it is today. But even if it was, because like sometimes it's like it's $1,000 and it's like which is worth $10,000, right? A lot more, but like sometimes those translations don't work. I don't think it being 40 grand versus 400,000 ultimately makes anything different from that, but just kind of like showing her emotions, her uneasiness as she's making this travel to go see her lover Sam Loomis. I think she just does a great job with it, and carrying that first part of the movie. But I mean, Anthony Perkins' performance is just mind-blowing.
If you didn't care about Janet Leigh whatsoever in the beginning of the movie, then the first side of this movie just wouldn't work, because you'd just be like, all right, like
the whole movie
fucking
wouldn't work. Because thank God that bitch is dead. Like that's what happens.
Exactly. It would have been like like the later day Friday the 13th sequels, where it's just like, all right, let's just get Jason killing these teens. Come on, fuck up those teens right there. And that's not what this movie's about. But I think overall, Anthony Perkins. I mean, we haven't talked about Vera Miles, who is shockingly still alive today. Didn't expect that.
God bless.
God bless. Yeah, exactly. But her character is more so just like concerned and not really amazing to the point the other characters are. But
she's just there. She's just there. But
I think Anthony Perkins just plays like a multifaceted part right here, where like at some points he's just really creepy and unsettling. Some points he's just like, oh, the typical normal hotel clerk or whatever.
And from my knowledge, it's the first time an audience has ever seen a character like that before. Like you could say like, am I taking Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs or Anthony Perkins in Psycho? I'm taking Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, but you can also now see the influence of Anthony Perkins in that role, right? It all stems from that like one performance there, and it was groundbreaking at the time. It was controversial at the time, and I really don't think this movie has aged poorly. I think it's just kind of aged from like horror to thriller. Like I think that's just the only distinction I would make in this kind of movie.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I mean, the horror elements like aren't really as shocking because we've seen so much more in this. This movie is considered one of the earliest examples of the slasher genre, and of course, when we get to the point of like Michael Myers, Michael Myers like fucking like melting some lady's face off in a fucking hot tub. Psycho seems a little quaint by comparison.
Definitely.
Are you ready, comedy partner? Waka waka.
All right, Tommy, does Psycho work as a Muppet adaptation
I'm literally Googling right now if Muppets ever did like a Psycho
I
parody.
feel like there's got to be something, right?
There's some like image on Google of like Miss Piggy dressed as Janet Leigh right now, outside the fucking Psycho house. I mean, like I said at the top of the pod, there's an episode, there's Looney Tunes Back in Action, had Bugs Bunny pretending to do the fucking like Janet Leigh scream thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, overall, no, this movie is a little too creepy and unsettling, but I could definitely see the Muppets just
Parodying
so
parodying the shower scene, absolutely.
yeah.
Would be up their lens there. All right, Tommy, review time. Give me your score out of 5.
I think this is a really good rewatch. I think this is a really fun Hitchcock movie. I think this is my favorite of all of his movies. So overall, this still plays really well today. I think the acting still really holds up. I mean, the cinematography and the score is iconic. I'm gonna go, I think 4.5 out of 5. So really like this movie.
It's not my favorite Hitchcock. I still think I prefer Vertigo and Rear Window over it. But I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It's just a fantastic thriller with horror elements. You know the twist, you know what's coming, but that doesn't take away from the creepiness and the surrealness of Anthony Perkins' characters, and just the significance of this movie culturally. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. I'm actually going to go see it on Halloween at the Franklin Theater in downtown Franklin, Tennessee. Yeah, they're showing it on Halloween, which now after seeing it, I'm like, I don't know if you, but it's just kind of considered a Halloween classic at this point.
I think it'd be fun to be seen on the big screen.
Oh, it'd be so fun to. Oh, it had nothing to do with it being seen on the big screen. It's more of a like, maybe Halloween would have been the better one for October 31st. You know, I think they're playing that on Sunday or Monday. But Tommy, any final thoughts before we wrap this puppy up?
So thank you guys so much for listening. We have a great month coming up. We're going to be covering Casino and I forgot Scarface, which we're going to be trying to catch a screening of. I've watched fucking like 3 De Palma movies since we covered Carrie.
He's great,
and the dude's great, but for some reason the other 2 what's it called, Brian De Palma movies I watched also open up with a girl showering. So it's just like that dude clearly has this thing right there.
Did you watch Blowout at all?
Oh yeah, I watched Blowout, was one of them.
I love that movie.
Fantastic movie.
Great Travolta.
The other one I watched was Dress to Kill. So I'm definitely on a De Palma kick. I'm really excited to check out Scarface for the first time.
Yeah, because that's his most iconic film, and then Casino's the follow-up to Goodfellas. Yeah, and then we had something else. I can't remember what it was. Tommy's frozen right now. I'm just vamping right now, or right now it's just me. Well, thank you all so much for listening today. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok at Scene It Pod. You can find us anywhere you can get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. Give us a subscribe. It helps us out tremendously. We'll be back with Casino to kick off the month of November. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you again next time.